So, dear Philip, there were many discussions around weaponry support issue. What is your point of view about those planes issue, anti-rocket missiles and other weaponry support to Ukraine?
Two aspects. One, I think it's legitimate to try to get planes. If you guys can find me a plane in a country adjacent to you, I will get a tractor and drag it across on the road to get to you. So I think it's important. Likewise, there are missiles that the United States doesn't have that you may be able to get from other countries, and you ought to try to do that as fast as possible. You may pay exorbitant amounts, but it is what it is. So I think that's really important. The second aspect is, right now there are still, even the majority of the country is not under attack and not occupied. And you need to build up and create territorial forces in those areas, particularly urban areas, small towns, even small roads, hamlets that sit on a road, and get them weapons, munitions, and try and get them anti-tank weapons. And I will help any way I can to get additional there. But you need to get that territorial force accelerated and getting them something more than just rifles, so that they can take out a few tanks, so they can slow down things, they can blow up a bridge. So it's those two things. There's the large stuff, yes, but there's also the other. Even if you can't get all of that large stuff, you can win if you have enough area defense that your main force can then come and go on the offense and clean things up.
Could you name, please, what types of weaponry do we need?
Well, for the last 3 years, I've been arguing that we should give you American F-15s, and so my preference is F-15s because it's a nice airplane. It can go air to air, it can go air to ground. In terms of stuff, but it takes years for training. It takes, but in terms of so the MiG-29 is good for air defense. If you can get Su-25s for ground attack. Anybody who has Mi-24s, attack helicopters, who, if they're a NATO member, you need to encourage them to come to the United States. The United States has AH-64, our attack Apache helicopters, and we have more than we currently have manpower for. So we're putting them in reserve. Overnight, we could put those on planes and get them to whatever country who would then give you their attack helicopter. We have Blackhawks, do the same thing, and then give you their Mi-8s. Air defense, you need basically Soviet era air defense. There's still a lot of people around the world that have it.
S-300.
Yeah, there's a few, but they're hard to replace because if they're not the U.S. production of Patriot is very slow and extremely expensive. We don't have enough Patriot for our own army, let alone for allies, let alone for others. And so allies aren't going to want to give up their Patriots because we can't replace them with anything. And other guys aren't going to replace their S-300s unless they get a Patriot. We don't have a Patriot to give them. You might get a few, but SA-6s would not hurt. SA-10s and 11s, there's still some around out there, which are sort of predecessors for the S-300s, are still viable.
Got it.
And those would be the systems.
Thank you, Philip.
And for your territorials, RPGs, yep. and Carl Gustavs. Carl Gustavs from Sweden, there's thousands of them in the Baltic area in particular. The Carl Gustavs and RPGs from the RPG-7s to whatever the latest version is, as many as you can get, and give those to the territorials.
Thank you for this part, Philip.
Sure.
We have, it is around sanctions. Those steps which we already saw from our Western partners, those sanctions which already done. Is this enough up to you, or sanctions must be improved?
Well, first of all, we need to realize sanctions did not, and they're not a good instrument for deterrence. We need to look at a history of sanctions against other countries, North Korea, Iran, and that hasn't been very effective in getting them to reverse course. They'll play with it. They find ways to get around it. So sanctions can be very helpful because they're painful, but they're by themselves, they're not decisive. So you think of it as you need an anvil and you need a hammer. The anvil is your own military operations destroying the invader. Mm-hmm. And the hammer can be sanctions that just beat them and beat them and beat them until they can't take it anymore. The hammer by itself is like hitting in the air. So what other things could be done? Well, China is obviously backing Russia. Putin had obviously got Xi's approval in 2 years ago in London at the Royal Defense College and the London School of Economics, warning that China and Russia were getting together. And everybody said, oh, no, that's not likely. Well, it's a reality now. And China has obviously approved this invasion. Putin obviously delayed it because Xi didn't want to do it during the Olympics, which made it more difficult because the ground had gotten muddier and it slowed things down and paid a price. So the Chinese weaponry is benefiting from Russian components, less big systems. There's still a few, but mostly components that they can't design. And Russia's benefiting from Chinese purchase of their oil, of gas, and backstopping their economy with sanctions. So we need to start thinking about how to, if China continues to support Russia, to hold China accountable. That's very, very hard because, it's one thing to cut off economic ties with Russia, which, companies were playing, but it wasn't. And China is like, oh my God. If you go to a supermarket or a big store in the United States and said, you can't buy anything that's made in China, there'd only be 10, 20% of the stuff left. But there are things that one can start to do. Likewise, countries that are continuing to work around and help Russia. I think you want to selectively, very carefully, like a sniper, rather than as a broad blanket. So you go, okay, you're India. You're using this opportunity to get more Russian equipment. Okay, you can do that. But you also have been asking us to have cooperation in the East vis-a-vis China. And if you want that to stop, we can stop it. But this is not the time to suddenly enrich your army with stuff just because. I'm just using that as a hypothetical, by the way. I have many friends in India and their general staff, but that's an example, okay? But there are countries you don't want to. You're getting a lot of help from Turkey. Turkey still needs to finish their air defense system, and they bought it from Russia. If it was me, I would buy as much stuff as we can from Turkey and not put sanctions on them for that. Just let it go. Israel, there's other countries that one can. So I'd be very, very, very selective. But on those you target, Now, also, we haven't begun to put sanctions on the Russian the parliamentarians, government, the second order, third order government ministers, every diplomat. And I think it's also time to start highlighting criminal behavior by Russian military units and under Russian command. And you go, and I'm not talking about, you just go, oh yeah, let's bring up General Gerasimov. No, you find Colonel so-and-so who's in charge of the air attacks on Mariupol.
Right.
And we name him, and we highlight it, and we say, we're not sanctioning you. You are a war criminal. I think holding individuals, not collectively, but going through and identifying people who have done outrageous things, and they can say, "Oh, I was doing it under orders." Well, that's what the Nazis said, and Nuremberg said that's not an excuse. So we need to start applying that, and at least doing it publicly. Whether we end up in a trial or not, we'll see what happens. But I think that's an important aspect.
So that's really very interesting, because we and our partners have sanctions top rank officials, right? But there are thousands of middle rank officials who are serve the regime, Putin's regime. So what kind of consequences we will receive if we will put sanctions against those thousands of officials of middle rank officials? And why this is important to you, these sanctions against middle rank officials in Putin's regime? Why this is important?
So there are, I think there's different tiers, and there's different sanctions. The word sanction doesn't fit every thing. So for Putin's friends, and there's a lot of them, even some oligarchs in Ukraine and so forth, and a lot of them in the US, I think we need to start going after their investments in New York. I think we need to, now that the Swiss have said they're not neutral, we need to have the Swiss of whose funds are where, and put them in escrow, if not seize them, and start dealing with that level. And there's a lot more pain there that can be added. In terms of officials, naming them and highlighting their role. Now, you know, a guy who says he's a minister of agriculture, and I said, I didn't participate in war. Yeah, but you're a participant in the regime. You are banned from international travel. Any international bank accounts you have, we're going to try and seize. And started at the ministerial level, you go to the deputy ministerial level. So the military, and you have to be very specific and not broad back. You know, who was in charge of this atrocity, and who was in charge of this atrocity, and who was in charge of this one, and we start pulling those names out and making them public. And it's not, I'm sure, between your intelligence agencies and ours, we can find the names and photographs and backgrounds of a number of these guys. And we say, hey, you are a war criminal. What you're doing is against the laws of war because of this. We're not doing this as propaganda and just throwing stuff against the wall. There are specific times, specific. The guy who's the commander at Mariupol, whose tanks are firing in apartment buildings. Yeah. We can find the colonel who's in charge of that battalion tactical group. We can find the commander of the 8th Guards Army and his name. We're going to know it, and his deputy, his chief of operations. So we start doing that and highlight it.
And what I want to understand, how regime will feel it if we will use sanctions about those thousands of middle rank officials. What the consequences it will be for the regime?
Yeah. I'm not saying it's going to be decisive, because I don't believe sanctions of any kind are going to be decisive. But I think they help. So let's start at the bottom. You start calling out and holding Russian commanders while the combat's gone, not years from now. Now, I say, this colonel, this general, your units committed atrocities, violated the laws of war. Even if it doesn't affect their behavior, there are other guys who go, when they get the order, fire on those apartment buildings. Yeah. I don't want to. And that, you can't measure that materially, but that has an effect. It does have an effect. So you know, I don't know how many of the second tier and third tier bureaucrats in Moscow have overseas accounts, but some of them do. Some of them have credit cards. Some of them do. Just start putting them on ban, a travel ban. And, you know, when all of a sudden they see their name on a list and you are not allowed in the following countries, and you go, well, I'm the minister of, you know, of nothingness. But well, sorry, you can't. You know, I didn't have anything to do with the work. Yes, you do. You're part of a regime. Targeting RT, Russian television and their information system. The people who are on the network, who are spreading false lies, who are doing all these things, and some of their cohorts in the United States, we need to start calling them out. It's just started against this guy who's very popular on Fox Radio, Fox Television, called Tucker Carlson, and he is nothing but a Russian troll, and the Russian RT is actually telling people to go and reproduce his stuff. So we need to publicize it, embarrass him. Hey, what are you? The spokesman for Putin? Really? You like having that label? And also, there's no reason why we can't put economic sanctions on some of the television personalities. They like to you know, to the extent they make a decent amount of money, they may have overseas bank accounts, overseas credit cards. No. Okay, sorry, you just lost your Amex. You just bought your Amex card. So there are ways. Is it decisive? No, but it adds the pressure. And it doesn't. So, but I want to emphasize, it does not replace the West helping you militarily.
Absolutely,
it does not replace it.
Absolutely, it was the first part. That's why it was the first part of our conversation. So playing a long-term game, I believe that those sort of sanctions will be useful and effective. And it seems that we have too much job to do together. So thank you for your time and for this conversation.
This battle is not just about Ukraine. It's about everything the West stands for. And it isn't even just about Europe, because it also involves the East and people who are going to try and apply the same, maybe not the same military tactics, but they're trying to apply the same thing to put their own hegemony in other areas. And this stopping imperial hegemony, this battle, and both the Chinese and the Russians say, oh, we have tripolarity. Well, tripolarity historically is very unstable because you end up getting 2 against 1. Well, and that's exactly what we have now. We have 2 against 1. Those 2 against the United States and any allies who want to come along with us. And so this is the beginning of a sea state change. In 100 years, 200 years from now, people are going to remember the date that the Russians started the war. It's the date that it became very clear what people had pretended didn't exist. And that is a whole new system of imperial, anti-imperial wars. And Ukraine, and the people who are in Ukraine, who are fighting for Ukraine, are the first crusaders for the West, the first. And they need to be recognized that as heroes. Our heroes, all our heroes.
Thank you, Philip, for all you did, for those years, and for your support right now, and for your inspiration, I believe, as well.
My humble honor.
Thank you, sir.